and
Recording in
CEO of the West
progress.
Hartford Chamber of Commerce, and I would like to welcome you to today's colorful conversation. This colorful conversation is being produced and has been facilitated by our Minority Business Network. The Minority Business Network was established in 2020 as a committee of the West Hartford Chamber to provide visibility, networking opportunities, and resources to chamber members who are also members of underrepresented racial, ethnic, and religious populations. Their mission is to provide members with opportunities, connections, and resources. They host a series of programs and events to do that, which will increase visibility to minority-owned and represented businesses, provide a discussion for the unique challenges faced by minority professionals, and increase diversity within the West Hartford Chamber. You can learn more about the Minority Business Network and the West Hartford Chamber at whchamber.com. One of their reoccurring programs is Colorful Conversations. Colorful Conversations is a quarterly panel discussion designed to take a deep dive into the issues that disproportionately impact minority populations. We invite experts from across the country and the world to educate the community on topics of interest and propose solutions of the issues faced. Past topics have included healthcare, education, access to technology, and employment. These forums stream live as they are today on Zoom, Facebook Live, and West Hartford Community Interactive and YouTube Live. Thank you to West Hartford Community Interactive for today's live stream. Today's topic is breaking bias, multiculturalism, and messaging. I would like to thank the Minority Business Network Committee and specifically the chairperson, Christopher Clark, for their leadership and work to put today's program together. Thank you. I would also like to recognize our program sponsors, Comcast Business and Liberty Bank. It is now my pleasure to introduce the moderator for today's conversation. Yvonne Alston is the Chief Cultural Architect, CEO, and founder of Indelible Impressions. Yvonne is an unapologetic, authentic amplifier and advocate for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. She established Indelible Impressions Consulting to advance important conversation, education, and competencies to help organizations understand the importance of culture and its impact on the human experience. Her firm and team focus on challenging systems of inequity, championing dimensions of diversity, and driving inclusive practices holistically. I'm going to turn it over to Yvonne. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Kate. Thank you, this amazing community and panel for this discussion today. I couldn't be more excited to be the moderator today. As Chris mentioned, our focus today is going to be on implicit bias and at the intersection of multiculturalism and messaging. As we know, our world is consistently evolving, and the makeup of that world is evolving as well. In fact, recent data reports indicate that by year 2045, the world, as we know it, at least here in the United States, is going to be transforming. Those who have been identified as racial minorities will no longer be considered the minority of our society. Furthermore, we know that with the rise of multiculturalism, that there are so many layers to it. There are so many experiences and expectations that we have of ourselves in our similar identity communities, as well as with those whom we work aside from and work with across multiple identities. We also know that more than ever, organizations and communities are looking for ways in which to advance conversations, civic engagement, as well as progress for all people. And so Minority Business Network is at the helm of this when it comes to the West Hartford Chamber of Commerce. And we couldn't be more excited than to have the folks that we have today together collectively to talk about multiculturalism, to talk about the messaging that happens in different pockets of society and what's really needed to advance this conversation. So I'm going to do a brief intro and then tap each person to dive a little bit deeper on themselves and how they identify. So we have in alphabetical order, Adrienne Billing-Smith, who is the equity coordinator for the town of West Hartford. We have Carlos Brea, Director of Client Solutions for NBC and Telemundo CT. We have Patrice Taft, who is the Retail Banking Officer and Branch Manager of Westfield Bank, and we have Marjorie Brown of CTB Staffing. So, Adrienne, we're going to just start with you. Tell us a little bit more about yourself and why you want to lend your voice and experience to this panel today.
Thank you, Yvonne, and thank you to the Chamber for having me today. I'm really excited to be here with this amazing panel. My name is Adrienne Billing-Smith. Being here today, is important because, as you talked about, the intersections of identity and multiculturalism, what we do in probably each of us in our work and who we are, feeds into the work that we do. Myself being the equity coordinator for the town of West Hartford, I have a couple of different intersections and experiences that bring me to this role, that deal with my identity, being a Black woman, being queer. It really gives me a different view on life, but it also, like you said, I intersect with so many different pieces of me. As I drove in today, I thought about also that piece of we talked about last week as we met before, of being a Southern woman, which gives me an entirely different view, once I moved up here to West Hartford 11 years ago, what that means and what my experiences have been that are different from living in West Hartford, coming from the South, and how I came to be, right? And how my feelings. So, being here and lending my voice and my little piece of the world and my puzzle piece, I hope that there are other people out there who can find the connection. And I think that's so important when we do talk about the inevitable rise in multiculturalism. It's not something new. It's not something, there's no new will being built, but who we are and how we connect to each other to make a better community.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for that. And I appreciate you bringing forward the dynamic of geography, right? Because that does significantly play a role in how we're seeing how others engage with us and how we engage in reciprocity. So I think that that's fantastic. Thank you so much for being here. Moving next to Carlos.
All right. Thank you for having me. So I was born in Cuba, and my family immigrated here when I was 5. So we first started in, speaking of regions, right? Grew up in Silicon Valley. That's kind of like where I call, my hometown, near San Jose, California, and then moved over to Miami. And that's when I started working at Telemundo. And that's where I've been working for the last 23 years. So started there, got that Southern perspective as well as when I spent those times there. And when we moved about 7 years ago, the NBC station here bought the Telemundo station. So that's what brought me up to Connecticut to help launch the station here in Connecticut, to help them kind of bring it together. And, that purchase was, relevant to like our conversation, right? Like it's that growth of the Hispanic community. It's that growth of the multicultural community that corporations are seeing, that they need to be invested in it and grow with it. So that's part of what brought me here, and I'm delighted to be a Connecticut resident for sure.
Fantastic. And much like Adrienne, having that vantage point of coming from the West Coast, right? And then coming to the East Coast, that vantage point in terms of how people experience multiculturalism can be different as well. And so you bring both perspectives to this conversation today and to your identity and whomever you engage with. So thank you so much for that. All right, we're going to now move on to Patrice. Patrice, tell us a little bit more about you and how you're lending yourself to today's conversation.
Hi, yes. So I am the branch manager here, and I am West Indian. So I own it, and I'm proud to be Jamaican. So whenever someone walks in and they realize that the branch manager is a woman, and then they hear my accent and they said, "Oh, you're West Indian." It changed the entire atmosphere of the interaction, especially when it's a younger person in their 20s, because now it goes from they're coming in to just trying to do banking to find out how they can get to where I am, and we have a very impactful conversation, which is fantastic, and they leave differently, you know. So that's part of why I'm here. I recognize that it is important for me to be in the community, to let other people know that it is possible. There are positions in the bank that you can aspire to and you can have a successful career at.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Patrice. And last but certainly not least, Marjorie Brown of CTB Staffing.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks, Yvonne, and thanks, MBN, for this opportunity here. My name is Marjorie Brown, and resident now of West Hartford, but I was born in Honduras, Central America, so a Latina. I came here when I was 5 and lived in New York. So went to New York and came to Connecticut in '98 for college and have been here ever since. I got into the staffing industry because I saw an opening for a position that they needed someone to be bilingual. I had no idea on how to recruit, but I knew that I wanted to utilize my language, be able to help people find jobs, place them at opportunities, and interviewed for the position and utilized that language, and I have been using it ever since. I've started my own staffing agency, CTB Staffing, where I am focused on helping clients hire qualified bilingual candidates, just to be that voice and that person to continue to help customers and help candidates be able to make that match and fill open positions and roles that are needed. So I'm excited to be here and definitely excited for this conversation.
Thank you. And thank you for what you're doing about expanding the pipeline. And I dare say that all of us who are doing this work are doing exactly that. We're broadening the doorways and expanding the pipeline for opportunities for folks who have been historically, systemically, and even modernly marginalized. And so I appreciate those efforts. So this is going to be a great discussion on our, for community and society's cultural expansions and expressions and understanding. So let's get right into it. Adrian, your office in particular seeks to advance the welcoming and experiences of different identities within West Hartford. What should the residents of West Hartford and even those visiting West Hartford expect to experience, and how is your office helping to shape those experiences?
Thanks for that question. I think as you come into West Hartford, I feel like it's a welcoming town. That's why I'm here. I will give a little story that I moved to Connecticut, and specifically West Hartford. It was a blind move. A friend said, hey, my mom's best friend lives in this town. I think you might like it. And as soon as we drove into the town, we knew we would love it. We were welcomed into our own little neighborhood. We saw every single background possible. And at that time I was actually pregnant. So we saw people with strollers, we saw interracial couples, we saw grandparents, we saw all these things happening. I said, this is the town where we should be. And so as I moved into this position as equity coordinator, I wanted people to know that this is a town that we are, in everything that we do. And it's not perfect. I won't ever say it's perfect. I don't think any town is perfect in what they're doing. I think it requires leadership and a belief system, in, what multiculturalism, what diversity looks like, what you're looking for, all these different experiences. I think the best story that I have in what we're doing and what I really believe in is, I was talking to a new resident who had come from Texas. And they said, the reason I moved to West Hartford was because I walked into your center and I saw a huge mural of Martin Luther King and other, Black folks that meant something. And I knew this was a safe town for my family. So that that's what I want people to know, that, you know, we're working together as a community. We are committed to this work, and specifically my office offering different sorts of programming and events and educational opportunities, not only, you know, internally, where people think this is just an internal position. It's a very much an external position where I offer those stories so that people can have dialogue. I think that's so
Yes.
important, to build connections, to have dialogue, and people showing up and making partnerships with, you know, our local library is one of the best, you know, the chamber, doing stuff with our economic development team. So I think when you have these partnerships within the organization that bleed out into the community, you're able to really have those real true conversations and get to know people, you know, whether that's dealing with housing or discrimination or any of those things. Having these conversations and getting the information and building off of that data so you can do better, you know, that's what, you know, my ultimate goal is, as a professional here at West Hartford and as a resident.
Yeah. And I think that that's so important, because when we think about the experiences that we want to have and the richness that comes from having a diverse community, learning more about people's lived experiences, whether they grew up in the town or they migrated to the town or transplants for work, whatever those dynamics might be, that there's an inherent value in those individuals, in the stories of their lives, and how that can further enrich our own. And it's one thing that I will say, as someone who's grown up in Connecticut, to see the transformation of West Hartford has been really amazing, because I can recall a time when West Hartford was primarily known for its wealth, right? And that it was not a very diverse place. And so seeing that transformation and that multiculturalism be so intentional by the town, so that the experiences of the people that come there, whether they come there to visit because the dining is amazing, the options for restaurants, or just the culture of the town is worth experiencing. The fact that the town has been so intentional about creating that and fostering that with intentionality and meaningfulness for diverse groups of folks is just been really beautiful. And so I will honestly say that there was a time when I necessarily, as a Black woman, did not feel welcome there. And to now feel welcome there is really nice. Like, I don't have a concern about wherever my foot shall tread within that town. And that's very meaningful to me.
Yeah, and I heard those stories as well, and I'll be very quick. I've heard those stories from whether it be coworkers or lifelong folks here in Connecticut who have talked about their experiences coming through West Hartford. And I never wanted that experience. And, you know, people always ask me why, and it's always going to be my son and my niece, and this is their home. This is where your job is to try to you always say you want them to fly, but you're like, but come back home, right? You want them to come back home and bring their families home. So when you're doing this work, and when you talk about intentionality, that's, you know, you have to have a why to this. And I think when, like I said, when you have leadership and you have the people, leaderships across all departments, and doing the work and wanting to learn and wanting to have those discussions and leaning in, it becomes really important. And you start to see it go out into the community, because we are internally doing this work and we're putting it out in the community so that we're all meeting and starting to speak that same language with one another. And I think that's really important.
Fantastic. Thank you. All right. I'm going to pivot over to Carlos now. Your role is in media. And it has a lot to do with shaping the perceptions and the attitudes towards multiculturalism. So I have a question for you from a business standpoint. How can businesses really focus on advancing their reach and impact through intentional multicultural messaging and promotion? Why is that important?
Well, that's a great question. And it's really important, specifically with that stat you gave, that by 2045, you know, the entire population, it's going to be a multicultural majority, meaning for the first time in history, you know, in US history, that white is not, you know, is going to be less than 50%, right? Everyone else, you know, Black, Asian, Hispanic, and mixed is going to be the driver. What's interesting though, we don't have to wait till 2045, because I think in media, I think everyone has kind of been caught a little bit on their heels a little bit recently with these huge shifts
Mm,
in this young generation of Gen Z, right?
yes.
How they consume media, the brands they like, the brands they don't like, the activism, all these things. Everyone's kind of like really trying to understand, and there's a lot of nuance. But I think one piece of nuance that's really significant that gets that explains a lot of it and doesn't get talked about enough is that in 2020, Gen Z, those 13 to 24-year-olds, they're the first generation that is the multicultural majority. So now they're 18, and now that generation is the multicultural majority.
Yeah.
And so if you're under 35, you're already there. That's your generation, your cohorts, the folks in your age group. You're already living in that multicultural majority in the United States. And by 2028, if you're under 50, you're going to be there. So when we talk about that, that's very important, because if you've noticed that this younger generation has really, they value that. They have different values.
It's a core value for them, right?
Yeah, and for them to connect, the love language of this younger generation, from studies from like the Hispanic Media Council has put together these long studies from 2018 to now, is they're searching for authenticity. And they grew up in this multicultural majority. So for them, it's not as drastically different as kind of like older. The older you get, the more different and kind of separate things are. For them, they don't look at it that way. And so if you're a company, and this isn't here in Connecticut, so it's not like just in LA or New York. This is here in Connecticut is a reality. So if you have a business and you're trying to reach out, the interesting thing in all the studies is showing that in general, multicultural marketing, if you put a commercial in culture content, meaning a Telemundo, a Spanish language outlet, a BET, the brand awareness, the decision whether they want to buy or not, and if they trust your brand, actually goes up. It's more effective than in culture spaces. What's really interesting with this group specifically is, even if a commercial and advertising, if you're recruiting, whatever your intention is to reach them, even if it's not in a BET or a Telemundo, and it's on, let's just say, NBC, CBS, but the commercial is representative, meaning there's bicultural, maybe a mixed cultured family, or LGBTQ presence or something, those numbers still go up, even when it's not. So it's really a call for authenticity. And I think the brands like a couple, like Fenty with the Rihanna brand, Selena Gomez, these brands have tapped into that. And they understand with their product lines, Fenty offering different shades of makeup.
Right.
Selena Gomez's line, donating 1% of her profits to mental health awareness, underserved community. They are voting with, this young generation's voting with their dollars. They are. These are important things to understand, not just from a marketing perspective, but also hiring. If you're hiring someone, you need to understand this, kind of like what motivates them. So I think instead of waiting until 2045, I think it's really important that folks understand this is happening right now. And this is part of the challenges that businesses have today, whether, again, you're marketing, recruiting, or trying to keep a certain culture in your business to keep it going. You need to pay attention to this, because this is how this is the workforce, and this is the growth engine.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's so much to unpack with that. And it's interesting because you hit on something that I've always been curious about, is that when I am watching a particular station or particular programming, and I see the intentional advertisements, that I will sometimes say to my husband, like, wow, I've never seen so many, if it will, Black demographic ads in a row that are tied specifically to that programming. And I've always been curious, like, is that intended to be so overt, right? That it's like, okay, we believe that this program is going to garner more eyeballs from this particular demographic. And so we want to market to that particular demographic intentionally. And also, when it's not that programming, what is the additional value of putting that type of advertising into the advertising stream to say, okay, well, this isn't necessarily that type of program, and yet and still across different races and ethnicities, there should be multicultural advertising peppered in, because otherwise we are basically claiming that a particular group is a monolith in some way. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what you see. I mean, the shows, look, and this is after years of underserving, right? Underserving this generation. It's not like these folks, like everyone just showed up, right? Like it's been around, but now companies are seeing where the growth is coming from, the fact they're very intentional with how they spend their money. And if you're not aligned with their values or whatnot, like, they're not going to support it. They're not going to, we call it there's return on investment, which you'll get back because of the scale and the growth, but the return on influence, it's them telling their friends, telling their cohorts, hey, this is a brand, I like it. That's really where you're getting, that's really the value. You want to be good standing and kind of and the interesting part of the research that's come out from that study isn't so much about the Black, Hispanic, Asian multicultural set. It's actually a lot with this young white group. That's really the fascinating. They, compared to their older generation, are way multicultural. They want to know about each other's cultures. They want to share into it. So it doesn't have to be it doesn't have to be just to that one group for it to be appealing.
Yeah, it doesn't have to be siloed. Yeah.
Yeah, because everyone, this generation, that's a big difference. The number one streaming artist, Bad Bunny, is Hispanic.
Yeah.
And to assume that Hispanics are the ones driving it, well, they're a big part of it. But in order for Bad Bunny to be the number one streaming content, Hispanics have to listen to Bad Bunny every day, 24 hours a day, to get that scale. But what's happening is, the rest of the multicultural majority is engaged and they want to learn. And that's what that's what we all got wrong in multicultural marketing. We thought when this moment would come, that basically this younger generation would kind of assimilate into, they'd eat more hamburgers and less taco, like they would they would speak their languages of, they would be kind of like speaking English. It's actually the opposite. And I think that's important to know, because it's a great opportunity for all businesses to take advantage of.
Yeah, you hit on something that indelible my firm has always thought about in terms of the work that we do in DEIB. And it's not just a return on investment. We say, you said influence, we say a return on intentionality and exclusion, right? We call it our radical ROIs. And so there's more of a return than just in dollars that matter. And I think for organizations and communities to understand that, will widen their perspectives of why they need to be focused on this, why this is important, and that is not just important to particular demographics, but that it's important to all. So thank you for sharing that perspective. This is a perfect time, I think, to segue over to Margie, because Carlos talked a little bit about the dynamic of employers, right? And expanding the employee base, the rise of multiculturalism in the workplace, right? And why that is so important. So Margie, speak to that a little bit in terms of what you are seeing with employer group clients and their need to address community and customers that have different identities.
Companies are definitely looking to bring on board diverse staff. And it becomes very difficult sometimes for talent acquisition to focus specifically on that, right? Because we have, when I say we, I'm going to include myself in that whole talent acquisition circle, but we have so many other positions to fill, but the ones that are lacking, say for instance, if we need a Spanish speaking sales representative or an account manager, there's dollars that are being lost by companies, right? When they don't have these right candidates or these qualified candidates in those positions. So companies are looking for diverse candidates. They are in need of diverse candidates. And an additional challenge that comes along with that is the talent acquisition staff is so tight and limited. But when you go out into these diverse communities, you can't just go to one meeting. You can't just go to one career event. You can't just go to one of anything. You have to immerse yourself in it a little bit more, right?
Yeah.
You need to show that dedication. We've used the word authentic plenty of times here today, which I love. And the companies have to show that authentic side of them, that they're inclusive and want diverse candidates to come in. And it's going to all the way through. It's going to go from the sourcing of the candidates to interviewing the candidates, right? Have a diverse panel of internal staff that is interviewing as well, because everybody wants to see themselves in someone else, right? When they're interviewing,
representation matters. Yeah.
it absolutely does. They want to see themselves in that. If a candidate is coming to visit your site, your artwork, your social media, your media alone, your commercials, all of that, because companies are, invested in their reputation as well, right? We talked about Gen X, Gen Z. They want to see that. We want to see that companies are invested in bringing on, diverse candidates. So it is high on their radar. I specifically was talking to a client who wants to hire more women, who wants to bring on more Latinos into their industry. And when I looked at the numbers, it is just in Connecticut alone. Carlos mentioned Connecticut numbers as well, but just in Connecticut alone, the women population itself is at 3.6 million. The total population is 3.6 million. 1.8 are females, and 1.7 is males. So the females are higher on that population chart there. This particular client only has 4 Latino Hispanic reps that work for them. There's almost 700,000 Latinos in Connecticut.
Right.
So
they're here. There's a population and a pool in which to draw from, right? There's no shortage of that, but there's a disconnect, it sounds like, between employers and the populations and how they're drawing from that. And Carlos, I'm just going to pause right there because Carlos, I think you're looking to jump in, double dutch in, my friend.
Yeah, thanks so much. Yeah, but just to Marjorie's point, I think totally significant and important. I think another thing to consider in that population number, if you look at Hispanics under 18, so right now Connecticut, the whole state's about 18% Hispanic roughly, or 17% Hispanic, which is in line with the country, so very diverse. Yep. But when you look at the population of 0 to 18, it's 29% Hispanic. So every day, every minute that goes by, it's going to become more multicultural, more, and to your point, Marjorie, that need that is going to be more important every minute that goes by. So companies that wrap their arms around it and embrace it and dive in with it are really going to benefit, because again, that's the growth engine that's in Connecticut and New England. It's not just here, it's across New England. So
that's great. Marjorie, if I can pivot back to you for a moment on that. So when we talk about the intentionality that employers need to put towards this effort, one of the things that I often see through Indelible, and we work with, employer groups, for-profit, nonprofit, smaller ones, large ones, is the intentionality and how that bumps up against tokenism, right? Because when you have employees from racialized backgrounds, the last thing we want to deal with is being tokenized by the organization. There was a big case a few months ago that I read about at Google, where there was an individual who identified as having a hearing disability, and Google really wanted to promote the fact that they have certain work conditions that are supportive and that there were accommodations being made. And I think pretty much put this individual on a brochure, and yet that was not the experience that the employee was actually having there, right? So there was this disconnect where the employee felt like, okay, you want to tokenize me in the messaging, right? And the different culture for the disability community. And yet that's not the actual experience of support that I'm having within the walls of the organization. Can you speak to that a little bit in terms of how organizations and how you might be coaching organizations a bit on, hey, it's great that you want to expand this particular demographic, that particular demographic in your workforce, but here's a caution with doing that in a way that tokenizes individuals in certain populations?
Companies really need to, Yvonne, just establish a fair hiring practice all the way through, right? If people are getting assessed for one position, assess everyone, right? And do those assessments all the way through, because you don't want to separate anyone. You have to walk that fine line of making sure that the interview questions are all happening all the way through, that hiring managers aren't skipping parts of the step because they kind of figure, oh, they can't, or oh, they can, or oh, this, or oh, that. It has to all be consistent. And when I say them, hiring managers and companies understanding that consistency is going to keep them out of trouble as well. HR problems, it's going to keep them out of trouble, and explaining to them that fair process is exactly how things need to be. And no one should be higher on that scale. We have to interview everyone absolutely equally in order to make sure that things happen correctly. So,
yeah. I agree. And I think part of that will come with when an organization is doing it from a perspective of authenticity, married with that intentionality, and understands the value of diversity within their organizations. That is not just about numbers to say we have so many of this, we have so many of that, but understanding the incredible value of individuals, both lived and professional experience, as well as for certain ethnic populations, right? Why they need to be included and have the opportunity to impact that organization with their ideas and their innovation and how they look at the world and problems. I think that's what's really important. So thank you for that. Speaking of which, Patrice, banking, financial services, right? This is an industry and a sector that has a very interesting history as it relates to giving financial support to what has been historically marginalized populations. And I think the banking industry has come a long way in many respects. However, there are still some challenges there. So with you being somewhat at the front lines as a banking manager and as someone who's trying to drive greater representation in the industry, speak to that a little bit more about what you've seen, how things have improved, and where we still need to go.
So when I wanted to back up to when Carlos was speaking about marketing, I actually perked up because in my office, there's literally a marketing poster of a Black family, like right there. And every time we get a new marketing poster, I'm like, is it ever? I was like, I'm not getting rid of my poster. I'm hanging on to my people, right?
I can understand it. Yes.
Yeah. And so, but as time goes on, like we're up to the point, like we have 3 posters in here a black, either a black family, a child. I think another one is like a teenager, somewhere in their early 20s, which to me is fantastic because yes, like I started banking 20 years ago. So like early 2000s, I started banking and it was different, you know, the demographics, my coworkers were different, customers, how we reached our customers and who we reached was different. But going through the years, I've seen a shift. But I do agree, we still have we still have work to do. There's still areas to improve on. But I do see a shift. I see a positive shift. And one of the things that for me that I've seen is like from when I started is bankers or banks are more intentional about going to the different communities, the different underserved communities, or communities of people who don't know that the resources are there or how to access it. Whereas in the past, you needed to come to us, basically, where now we're more intentional about going to community events, not just throwing dollars out there and saying, oh, we'll just sponsor it to just get our name up there. You will see a banker at some of these events, man in a booth or walking around or having a conversation with someone. Some of the other things that I appreciate that I'm now seeing is we each teach one. I think that's something Chris Clark always say,
Yes.
I'm
Each
seeing
one
it more
teach one.
now.
Yep.
Yes. I'm seeing it more so in the last few years than when I first started. And, I started as a part-time teller. But if it wasn't for my manager, when I was a part-time teller who didn't have a car, that was taking the bus everywhere in between, from college to work to everywhere, just giving me positive reinforcement, and pushing me and giving me the extra training and education that I needed to keep going. Just as a part-time teller, I probably still wouldn't have been here, So as time goes on, but that's an anomaly. That's not for everyone, especially when I started. But as I would say, as the mid to later on 2000s, the last 5 years, you're seeing that more and more. And me particularly, I try to educate, like even those who come into work, like, hey, just network with everyone you can come in contact with, like within the bank, because banking is more than just these walls that you see. Banking is more than just teller line. This is a huge industry. You never know who you can meet, what you can do. So for me, I think like people don't really know that there's still opportunities there and how to access it. But that's just because there's not enough of us there yet to be able to share the wealth. But as we're getting there, I think it's growing. It's certainly improving from when I started, which to me is fantastic. And then, one thing I would also like to say, like where banking is going, where it comes to like the services and products, like you'll see more like in like community banks, the true community banks, you'll find more low cost, no cost type of banking where you can find a free checking account versus, few years ago, you're charging a monthly fee. Like basically almost everyone charged, unless you went to a credit union, you were being charged some kind of a monthly fee or something to just keep your money in the bank. Just to keep $5 in the bank, you're charged $7, right. And which is rough for an individual who's like, I'm living paycheck to paycheck. So to see that, banking is coming along where they understand like, some of these ancillary fees is not advantageous and you're keeping people out, is huge.
Yeah. And it's interesting you mentioned that, because when we think about racial wealth gaps in our country, right, a lot of that has to do historically with the banking industry in many respects. Yes, real estate as well, but also banking. And I think when we think about uh, social status and we think about socioeconomic conditions, regardless of how someone identifies racially, if it's hard time, right? And you want to go ahead and put money in the bank and you want to be able to gain interest and things like that and not necessarily have to pay a fee that eats away at your liquid cash. I think that that's really important in thinking about the starting lines for different populations, that they have been different historically and they still are today. So to create more opportunities where people can not only gain more wealth because they are more seen, more appreciated, being given more opportunities in various workspaces and in community, then by broadening out how we are appealing to those individuals and creating new systems for wealth management, right, is a key factor in that. And I think that's at the core of this whole conversation in many respects, is that the systems that have existed for a very long time, although being based, and I'll just speak to it from an American standpoint, while at least offered in writings in our Constitution and so forth, that were supposed to be for all, when it came to the implementation side of things, those things did not necessarily match up, right, in terms of there being opportunities for all, and so forth. And so I think that it's really great for me now, to be able to see where the institutional rules of organizations like banking and certain industries are changing. They're catching up with the times, and it's not as holistic, perhaps, as we would like it to be, and not as fast as we would like it to be. But I am grateful for the small wins. I just want us to see a momentum continue so that there is more broad appeal, as well as broad valuing of the different voices, the different identities, and all of that. So I would like for us to pivot back. Is there anything that the rest of our panelists kind of want to speak to from an industry perspective in terms of multiculturalism and where you have your eyes set on? If you were to say, like, these are the goals that I have, let's say for the next 3 to 5 years for myself, for the work that I'm doing, what does that look like? And I'll pivot back to Adrian, whom we started with, to kick that off.
Yeah, I think, moving by trade, I'm an attorney, and I moved into, and I was also a flight attendant, where I saw lots of cultures and different backgrounds, but moving into municipal government and the public sector is very interesting. It is dependent on sometimes the communities you live in and what they look like, but majority of the time and historically have been very white municipal government, even in Black and brown communities, and what that looks like and who you're representing. And I think as I move in and do this work and work with all my partners and department leaders, what does that look like? What do these experiences bring to the table? Because we are a customer service organization at the end of the day. And when we're serving our customers, AKA our residents, when you come in, and it goes from just being greeted politely to, who looks like you. There's a wide spectrum of what that looks like in representation, but, ensuring that the people that are working in this organization reflect in some way or connect to our residents in some way. Recently, some of us started wearing pins of the language that we speak, our native language, to, starting taking, yes, to
Yes.
pronoun pins as well. So doing all of those things so people feel connected when they walk through the door is huge. And I'm thinking back to Marjorie or Carlos, like when people are saying we're gonna go and we want more of this or more of that, like sometimes it's not realistic in what you're looking for, what you're trying, because it's inauthentic, because it does become
Yes.
a tokenism. What
Yeah.
you're looking for is connection between people when they recognize
Yes.
each other. Because if you're only doing something based off the color of one's skin, and that's what we've been trained to do at this point, then you're missing out on a complete identity and all these cultures and all of these things, that the experiences that a person brings to the table. So when, by wearing some of those pins or speaking or being able to speak your native language or whatever you're able to do, when people hear that, they are comfortable, and then they will continue to come.
Yeah.
And they will bring more people with them. And if they hear that and they see that that's happening there in for me in the municipal government industry, then they're more likely to say, oh, they accept me. Yeah, I would apply for this job. Oh, I am
Yes.
qualified to be there. Oh, I do belong there. And I think that, when we sit here and we try to fit people into this puzzle in this weird way, we're missing out on a lot of great experiences instead of sitting down and finding those connections between one another.
And,
oh, sorry, Yvonne.
please, no, go, Marjorie.
Adrienne, thank you for saying that too, because one of the things I was going to say is that it doesn't happen overnight, right? There is a nurturing process that goes along with it. There is that communication process, and that, just integrate yourself with that community. As I mentioned earlier, you can't just go to one career fair one time out of the year and think that everyone's going to want to work for your company, right? You need to represent yourself authentically. You need to become a part of who you want to bring into your company, because that's the way that they're going to say, I want to work for them, right? I see myself there. I want to be there because this is what they've shown. They haven't just come to one meeting. They haven't just showed up at one event. They're here. They're here all the time, right? So employers need to focus on that. And again, it is challenging, but if you want to bring in diverse candidates and you want them to see the value of your company, you need to show that value out to the community as well. So
you have to do the work, and that's why I said in the very.
Oh, Adrienne, you went on mute. Oh,
sorry. As I said before, like it comes down to leadership showing that they want to do the work.
Yes.
And as you see that happen, and it starts to, go down into others in an organization, it does become authentic. And sometimes it is a fake it till you make it, because what you don't know, right? And as you're learning it and you start to believe it and you start to say it's that affirmation piece where you're going, I am beautiful, I am whatever. And you start to believe those things because they're real now. So I think, when you start to hear that and your leadership believes in that, and that they start to believe it, or they have someone who connects with them, then you build an organization. But if you start to bring in people and you put them into what I consider to be unsafe situations, when you tokenize them, or they're the only sitting in a situation, you bring them into harmful situations because they're constantly trying to prove themselves. They're constantly suffering from microaggressive behavior from their coworkers. They're constantly trying to, prove themselves rather than building your organization so that they can walk in feeling comfortable.
You hit on so many great points with that, Adrienne. When Indelible works with its clients, one of the things that we do with senior leaders is help them to understand their why. It can't just be because we want to be known as a diverse organization where everyone belongs. You have to understand that leadership needs to do some deeper dives within themselves as to why this is inherently important to them as a human being, first and foremost. And then why is it important to your organization? And they need to wrap their arms around that story, right? To understand, so that they can speak to it with that requisite authenticity and intentionality for others to be able to say, and then for them to rather cascade that down throughout their organization, so that it is very much a lived experience. So should someone step outside the walls of the organization and they see promotions and messaging, as Carlos mentioned, through social media and commercials and so forth. If you're an employee of that organization, you can say, yeah, that's a real experience. That's really true about them. Instead of sitting back and going, oh, well, there's lip service again, and you get a big P for performative, and that's nothing, in my organization, yeah, they talk the talk, but they don't walk the walk. Right. And so it is really important to establish that as a baseline. And then additionally, for everyone to feel that sense of belonging, we often say at Indelible that belonging is an outcome, right? That when diversity, equity, inclusion work together intentionally, consistently, synergistically, and successfully, you'll get belonging. And that's what everyone is looking for. Whether you join an organization, I mean, heck, even out in society, if you join a gang, it always comes back to belonging. People want to belong to something greater, like the YMCA's slogan is, right? Everybody wants to belong to something greater. Everybody wants to belong to a place and a space where they can step into it and say, I am welcome here. I am included. My voice and my perspective deserve to be here. I'm not afraid to share any part of my identity or my lived or professional experiences in this space. And even if people don't agree with me, there's going to be at least a fundamental respect for me, and I am yet valued for all of that I bring to the table. And I think that that is something that we're trying to, at least on Indelible's front, impact into organizations and communities that we're serving. And I think that that's really important because that's what people are looking for. Carlos, you spoke to that from a demographic standpoint when it comes to generations, right? That there are generations that this is the norm for them. They are expecting this, especially as they go into employer groups and different communities like that. People vote with their feet, people vote with their dollars, people vote with their likes or dislikes on social media, right? And I think that that's really important. Can you speak to that a little bit further in terms of your vantage point for future state because of those facets?
Oh yeah, and I think it's a great point. I think, like as a company, a media company or there's all layers of things in the next 5, 8, years that we are, embracing, whether it's from the production side, making sure that movies and programming, it reflects this generation and what they want to see and how they engage, and that our talent has the same perspective. So there's a lot to that. And I think a lot of the hesitance from companies and from people, it's almost, I don't say in vain, but it's like the resistance, you shouldn't resist it so much, because when you look around, if you just walk around anywhere in Connecticut or whatever, the businesses that are opening up, you'll see the multicultural influence. You'll see the business owners who are opening these businesses. What do they look like? Where are they from? They're serving exotic foods and content. I mean, just content alone. Another interesting fact from that study, 70% of us who are in this 18 to 34 demo jump around cross-cultural content every day. They could be watching something on whether they speak English, Spanish, it doesn't matter. It's just this younger generation in general. When they could be watching a Telemundo program, and then they'll watch Squid Game, which is a Korean show. They'll watch anime. They'll watch SNL later in they'll watch all of this in the same. So I think in the next 5 years, whether it's a media company or if you're in a marketing role, those are the things you want to keep in mind. But I think the fear of engaging, I think the one thing I remember, if you're familiar with Norman Lear, he's a famous television producer. He really helped kind of like bring these conversations to the mainstream America when it was a really tough
Archie
ask.
Bunker and those
Jeffersons,
shows,
all those great shows. He had a quote when he was trying to, they were asking, like, how were you convincing these networks to do it? And he would say that, like, it's not only a good thing to reflect where you live, right? But it's wildly successful. So
Mm.
it's a matter of those businesses who are hesitant, like, don't be hesitant. Dive in and, like you said, just authentically engage, and you'll see the benefits. I think the only concerning part when you mention social media is a lot of great things happen in social media. You know, like those brands that we were talking about before blossom because of social media. In many cases, they devote a lot of attention to it, and it brings a lot of awareness. But a lot of the algorithms that are built into that and that are going to be built into AI, there's a lot of like implicit bias that's built in to the, so like, so the more, so that's going to be something to like, how do we balance that? You want to bring in the right staff, you want to bring in the right folks, you want to have the right messaging, but leaning into technology as it's not a silver bullet, right? Like, I think the holistic conversation is really important, because some of these algorithms, just because the data will tell you something doesn't necessarily mean it's not biased. You might fall into the trap just by using a certain type of technology or leaning too heavily in one type of technology. So I think that's probably the other side of that, the concerning part.
The other caution. Yeah. And, I recently had a discussion with one of our clients, and we were talking about why people are so afraid to try. And I was saying that, the whole notion of calling people out and holding people accountable and cancel culture, in my perspective, as the leader of Indelible, is that it has not done us as much good as originally intended. Right? Because while it has been important to bring things to the forefront, to discuss some of these issues and these topics, and to hold some leaders accountable for their intentional missteps, we also, I think, many times have lost a sense of grace and forgiveness for what people didn't know. Right. And when people have made mistakes. So now we are on the flip side of that in many respects, where now people are so worried about being canceled that they don't even want to try for fear of making a mistake. And so we have to kind of try to reverse some of those effects so that we can get back to a place where people can be open, honest, and authentic and say, listen, I don't know if what I'm about to say is accurate or not. So please correct me if I'm wrong, right? Or if I offend you in some way, but this is what I'm thinking, or this is how I'm feeling, and be able to engage in those very real conversations, because without it, people are going to only stay in their safe spaces. They're not going to explore, whether it's in conversation or it's engaging with different demographics or going into a new town, let's just say like West Hartford, right? Because of what they may have heard from someone else, which might be a singular experience and not the totality of a thing, or they may not engage with certain individuals because maybe they've made a mistake in the past, or they've heard of somebody who's made a mistake in the past and has gotten, verbally decimated in some way that has been very difficult to recover from. And that's something that I think is very important. Not that we should think that we can go around and say or do anything, because there are consequences to that. And there's a responsibility we need to have for our actions and our words. And what is also true is that we need to have the opportunities and the grace and space to try, to actually try. And if we can get people back to trying, I think we can break down some of the barriers and the siloing that exists in communities and in society, so that multiculturalism isn't like a thing as much as it is a way of engaging and acknowledging with a global mindset versus an intentional marketing tactic or appeal, or a way to further diversify a workforce that will understand the value of it all and will come to it with that mindset. And heart set. I'm just going to throw that in there because I think both are necessary, right? Because oftentimes it is the heart that leads what we say and what we do, or what we don't say and what we don't do. So pivoting over to Margie, forecasting. into the future as it relates to this? What are you seeing, and what would you like to see employers do differently as they go forward?
I'm seeing, the need for hiring diverse candidates, which is great. And I would love to see employers really, really take the time out for that talent acquisition person and that staff to be able to do so, right? And with so many positions that are open sometimes, that need for diverse staff it's there. And we can't just say, well, I couldn't find the person, so here's somebody else, like here's this one. No, you can find the person, right? Put some legwork into it. Find out local organizations, find, network. Please mention networking, network with others, talk about the positions and the roles that you're looking to fill, where you're looking to make a difference at, and get the word out there, not just by having a job posted on a job board, right? But get yourself out there, let that talent acquisition person do that part of the job. And once employers realize that it's not just, you can't throw everyone together. That talent acquisition, that recruiter needs to get out there and let that person be in the community. I think that once employers really, really see that, they'll see a big difference in them hiring diverse candidates and bringing them onto their organizations. That's what I would love to see.
I think that's great. I want to answer a question that we got in the Q&A from Angela Bell. How do we get employers to change their hiring tactics to attract and retain people of color? And I think you just hit on that, Margie, very well. And it is about the intentional engagement in community and various communities, so that TA has the ability to bring forth candidates, whether they're getting tapped in at the high school level or at the college level, being very intentional and strategic about the partnerships that are being built across communities to really understand that. I was talking to one of my clients recently, and they provide healthcare services and substance abuse and misuse services, and they were saying how they're being much more intentional about engaging with different communities, and not just, one might say, the typical marginalized and oppressed communities that are Black and Brown, but Polish communities, different Middle Eastern communities that have come into the state, whether that is through refugee systems or just the fact that they've come over here for opportunities because they hear that Connecticut and the Northeast is more multicultural and more accepting and greater opportunities to have upward mobility, etc. That is very important, is connecting with people from these different populations and these different groupings so that they can be partners in expanding the pipeline, expanding the doorway, expanding seats at tables. And as I often say, it's not just a seat at the table, but it's the ability to have the microphone too, because you can sit at a table. I've been there. You can sit at a table all day long and be invited to have that seat. But if you don't have a microphone to speak, or you don't feel psychologically safe to do that, your ideas, your creativeness, and your innovation may never, ever get out there. And so I think that that's really, really important. So Angela, I hope that we've answered some of that for you today throughout the various facets of this discussion. And I think also what Carlos hit on as well in terms about the intentionality of the marketing and not tokenizing, but being authentic and true to wanting to connect with the communities, right? It goes back to the premise of intent versus impact. Intention matters greatly, and sometimes they don't always line up, right? We can have those good intentions and the impact can go really left. But I dare say, when there is authenticity and care focus into that intent, the impact will, I think, most oftentimes have the greatest opportunity for success. And I think that that's very true. Patrice, for you, banking industry, long game.
Well, for me, it's a two-prong. One is the financial literacy of of the community, because I've been intentional about I'm going into Hartford because like I'm like, yes, I'm in West Hartford, but here's Hartford, we're right here, and then inviting them to come to me, or I'll go out to other events. But it's just educating individuals and seeing more people grab a hold of their finances and just understand the basics of just saving and budgeting and understand what it means when they are in retirement age and leaving a legacy for someone. That to me is huge. Like that's where my biggest, like, I put all my efforts in, if you will, and when I invite people here, the main thing I always like to say is yes, we're in West Hartford Center, and the parking is the parking in West Hartford Center, but not everyone has a car, So I try to be purposeful when I'm delivering that message. It doesn't matter where I am and I'm delivering. I'm like, the bus stops in front of my branch, coming and going. And you just walk down the block and catch the bus in a different direction, So it's just, and the town line is down the street, So I try to draw that distinction as like, we're not separate. We're not out in West Hartford somewhere where you can't have access. You have full access, and so that's where I am, is just trying to get that word out and for it to grow more and more. I would love for one day when someone walks into my office and they see that the sign behind me that says branch manager, and they're not like, you're the branch manager, that is so awesome. Like, it's more like, yeah, you're the branch manager, that's expected. Like that's my long game also, like, I would love someone in their 20s that walk in my office and like, yep, I'm on the track to like have your job. I'm like, rock on, like that's where I am.
Yes. Yes. I absolutely love that. And that's so true. I mean, you hit on generational wealth and the opportunity to actually leave a financial legacy, even though our starting line, as I mentioned earlier, is different for certain demographics and populations. But I do believe that if we can reimagine and redesign some of the systems and take down some of the barriers that have been there, and that requires all of us, no matter how you identify, that requires all of us to care enough about it that we can actually start to create the parity of opportunity and experience for all. I think that we can get there. That's my optimism coming through. I really do believe that. And the more people who can understand and see that opportunity, then to your other point, it will be normalized. It will not be a surprise to see someone that looks different and may identify differently than what we've historically seen, that this becomes the norm. And it becomes widely accepted and respected, because that is a continued challenge for us. I want to hit on the notion, because I think we've kind of spoken about it, but haven't hit it directly, is this whole notion of discomfort, right? And we know that a lot of what we've heard in society, and the tagline was, we need to get more comfortable with discomfort, right? And one of the things that Indelible is working on, and I'm genuinely curious as to what the panel thinks about this. So this is kind of like a real-time feedback loop, if you will. So, and I won't take offense, because I'm actually asking for your expertise and your lens. We've been talking about possibly changing the framing of that to be more focused on the fact that we feel discomfort many times is rooted in something we don't know yet, whether it's information we don't know yet, language we don't have yet, a skill set we don't have yet, something we don't know how to do. But it is fundamentally rooted in oftentimes the lack of information or ability. What would happen if we reframe that to be more of an opportunity? That discomfort is rooted in an opportunity for growth. So our mindset changes how our lens looks at that, right? So we are instead, when we start to feel a sense of discomfort and we shut down, we don't talk about a thing, we don't do a thing. Instead, we lean into it like, oh, this is just an opportunity. This is just an opportunity for something I don't understand yet, or something I don't know how to do yet. And on the other side of this discomfort is the knowledge, is the ability. And so the window of discomfort is therefore shortened dramatically by that. What do we think about that? Is that plausible, or is that pie in the sky?
Well, my personal mantra is I don't need you to move a mountain, I need you to pick up your rock. And I think that's what you speak to. I think when people see something, it is scary to have it uncomfortable and not know what cliff you're jumping off of, right? And what you might land on and who might be there. When you pose it as something as, this is something that I can do. I know I can pick that up. I know I can do that task. And you put it in another frame, people are more willing to do it. So I think when you say get comfortable with the uncomfortable, great. Like, you have no choice. You're already in the conversation. But I think when you sit there and say, there's another piece to me is people in the work that I do assume that I know everything. And I'm sure, Yvonne's saying the
Yes.
same thing. And I'm like, I don't know everything. I don't. And that's
Yeah.
okay, because if I knew
Yes.
everything, then it wouldn't make this work worth it. Like, because
Yeah.
I'm learning from everything I'm hearing from people around me and gathering in community, whether it be about your family or how you feel about it, your job, or this or that, or the other, or your just any of your experiences, I get to learn about you, which feeds
Right.
me. And I think that's
Yes.
really important, that people know that we're in it with you. Like,
Yes.
we're all in this together. So, when you have to be the leader or the facilitator of those difficult conversations,
Yeah.
letting people know that, and letting them know that you're also picking up rocks with them, and you're gonna defeat this mountain together, I think creates community. And I think that comes from me, from just having that team mindset. I played college basketball, I coach college basketball, and having that team mindset that we have to do this together, we do not succeed.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
I
That
would
is
like to jump in.
Please.
I would like to jump in because I loved what Ace said, and being okay with saying I don't know everything, because she's 1,000% correct. When you're in any position where you have, you're the expert in what you're doing,
Sure.
people look at you as if you know everything and that you're supposed to be able to give a right out answer. And I'm happy with saying I don't know everything, but let me get you someone who else can help you with that. And I agree, like, we're all in this together, right? We're trying to move this train down the track, if you will. But, I had someone the other day that said, well, I'm only coming to you. You're my financial expert. You're my financial advisor. You're this. And I'm like, hold on now. I'm a banker. I have
am not
knowledge
the
of this,
genie in
this,
the
and
bottle.
this. Right, exactly, And I was like, but I do know a financial advisor for you, but, and I do know an accountant that can help you, and I do know this. So I think when, we realize that we, one, don't have to be gatekeepers to the knowledge and the things and the people that we do know, and be willing to share that information, I think that also will help as well. Because we also need to look at, like, we are the change agent ourselves. We can't just expect the broader organization to just do everything. Yes, we want it to come from the top down because that's the culture. But, if you're not being that change agent from where you are, nothing really is going to happen either.
Yeah, I agree with that. And when I think about, and I'll get to you, Carlos, when I think about the framing of what I mentioned, that is the thing, right? To give people that opportunity. So whether or not it's in facilitation, or even if it's just somebody in a meeting, right? To say, I can step forward and ask a question or give an idea or do something that it feels inherently uncomfortable to me, because it also is knowledge that I didn't have before. So that builds. So if I can do this one thing now, I can do it. I can replicate that experience. Carlos.
Yeah. Yeah, and I agree. I mean, I think, look, the fear, I mean, convincing someone not to be fearful in doing something new is a tall task, but
Yes.
I would leverage that with the people we're talking about, especially like at the chamber. I think they've already done the scariest thing possible, is to open a small business and try and risk everything out there, and they've made
Heck
it, and they've
yeah.
done, and they've done a good job of it. Getting into multicultural marketing, trying to get into hiring a staff that's diverse, trying to put out messaging without being scared, it's nothing to fear, because the good news is with your intention being positive, and if there is a misstep, it could always be fixed, and in associations like the West Hartford Chamber, you have all this and I hope I'm not
Yes.
offering up anyone's services here, but I mean, you can come to to your fellow members,
There's
to
resources, right?
yeah, and just ask and get some perspective and get different
Yes.
perspectives. To Patrice's point, like, no one's a monolith, but
Yes.
it's a great place to embark on those things and leverage the experience and knowledge of the collective, whatever that looks like for you. And I think that should eliminate the fear. But that would be my challenge to any business. I'm like, I think you've done the scariest part already. This, trying to include people and be, and
Yeah.
embrace them in their culture and have them be seen. I don't think you're going to struggle with that.
Yeah, I agree. I think doing that little bit of homework, right, before you go into a thing, to say, like, I'm not just coming with a random point or an idea. Like, I've done some research and I've understood. And so I'm going to speak on a thing. I'm going to recommend a thing that I think can help to move us forward. All right, Margie, I was going to pivot to you, but I think I'll pivot to you in a different way, because this conversation has been so rich and so many great points that we're going to have to wrap it up. But we do have one question from an audience member that I think would be great for you, Margie, to kick off. The question was, attracting diverse candidates has been an intentional effort, but how do we get companies to focus on retention? They lure candidates, but don't create an environment that makes them want to stay. I could do cartwheels on this all day long, but I'd rather the folks hear from you. Go for it, Margie.
So I think retention wise, companies just need to continue focusing on that educational part, right? That DEI portion of it. And just that mentoring is going to be important as well. Mentoring, the candidates is going to be really, really important to let them see that they can get to different positions, like Patrice, mentioned. They can, excel in their careers and move into other parts of it. But that mentorship is going to help out as well, to be able to retain them. I think that is going to be super important for companies to focus on.
Yeah, fantastic. And I would add to that the aspect of allowing voice, right?
Mm-hmm.
That is one of the biggest things that matter most to employees is, do I have a voice in this company? Is it respected? Is there that additional opportunity for pipeline and growth to fulfill my own personal success goals, as well as the success of the organization? So I think that's important. I was going to pivot to our closing question, but we have another question from the audience that just came in for Patrice. Where and when do you think financial literacy should begin?
I think that's a fantastic question, and I had a conversation about it the other day. I think
Yes,
financial
right on
literacy
time.
should begin right on time. I think it should begin as early as toddler. So, and the reason why I brought that up is because I have almost a 3-year-old, and we went into the store, and we got to the register, and I was like, where'd you find that item from? You know? But for us, we're realizing that she doesn't know what money is, right? As kids, as even in teenage years and beyond, they don't understand the true concept of money, what it does to help you and how it can actually hurt you. And that is not something to be feared, but that you are a fiduciary over what you have, right? So I believe that if you are taught this at a young age, as just to say like, okay, you know, you go to the store, here's $1, we got this $1 because mommy and daddy went to work, or, you know, and this is what this $1 can buy, you know, and then when they give them play money, have them pretend to have a bank, have them pretend to have a store, you know, you just teach them, make it fun. And as they grow and they learn, you know, then you can go into the weeds. You can start to give them more other real world applications. But the sooner you start children, then they will always have that foundation. So that when they get into adulthood, when things happen, when red flags pop up, they're able to say, wait a minute, that's not right. Let me reset. Because this is what mom and dad or X, Y, and Z taught me at an earlier age. And also, when you start to talk about money when your kids are young, you normalize it. It's not like a taboo kind of thing. I'm not saying as parents you should tell your kids what you make and everything, and then let them know that, you know, this month we broke and we just gonna eat some ramen noodles. I'm not saying to do that, but just be realistic so that they understand and bring it to their level. So as they grow, they can appreciate it. You know, I think it's important, like as for children, to start saving from when they're small, and include them in that as well. Use the actual piggy bank if you want, or if you want to be, you know, modern, however you want to do it, but include them in that so that they can understand. Because once they start understanding money from when they're young, when they get older, they're going to be able to maintain it. What if you work for 40 years and then you leave your legacy to them, and now they're like 30 and they don't know what to do and they blow it?
Right.
You know, that you just wasted all that time and effort that you did. So when you start them off young, then they can actually continue it, and then it turns into generational, right?
Yes.
It's not just going to stop with them.
Because they pass that along. I think that that's so true. That happened in my own family. My very first job that I got, which was just basically doing household chores, and then having a paper route. My dad was very intentional about me putting a certain percentage away in the bank. And I think I had a Liberty Bank savings account with a little passbook. And, you know, you go in and put your little money in and they dip it in the thing. And I would see the interest grow. And that's how it started. And I did the exact same thing with my own. Right. So to that point of that generational learning and passing those principles along, I think that that's very important. So thank you for that. All right, we are definitely at the end. I want to close out with a question to all of our fantastic panelists today. I hope you audience members had a notebook, because they were dropping gems left and right. And so you want to make sure that you jotted down those items. And if not, guess what? The amazing team at the West Hartford Chamber of Commerce has recorded it, and there will be a rewatch available for you all if you missed it or you want to go back and get some more of this expertise that the panel had today. So really quickly for each of you, what is the one thing that you want people to know from your perspective today? What would you like them to do to support wider acceptance and support of multiculturalism? And I'll start with Patrice.
The one thing I would like them to do is to just share their knowledge. Share your knowledge and what you have. Because by doing that, you're then helping the next person, and then they will then share what they know, and then they will break down that stigma of gatekeeping.
Yes. Well said. All right, Adrienne.
I think the one thing I would like to leave that what people should do in action is go around your community and visit some of these things that are happening in your community. I think it's just so important when you see different experiences and different cultures, and you're ingrained in them, you build a better community. And I say, you know, that's the best way to get to know folks, whether that be just the community events or in your if you have children in your school or you have a senior center. There's so many great things that are going, and I will speak specifically to West Hartford, that a lot of our departments are trying to do, and elevate, and multiculturalism and diverse experiences. And I think, you know, going to those events and meeting new people. Your neighbor isn't just a person who lives next door to you, it's a person who lives across town from you.
Yes.
And I think when we start to do that, that's a huge thing for me and community building.
Awesome. Awesome. Carlos.
Yeah, I think about one thing, whether you're recruiting, looking for new customers, or just even any plan that you have in your business, put multicultural marketing or multicultural lens at the beginning. It's just as important as anything else, rather than an afterthought. Because when you do it as an afterthought, that's when I think you get into issues. It's more difficult. Putting it from the very beginning makes things way more efficient, and it's just going to improve, all kinds of great results for your companies, whatever size they are.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Marjorie, close us out.
So what I would like to say is, if a company wants to see a difference in their organization, just piggyback on everyone else, engage in that community, right? Attend the events. Don't just go one time and say, oh, no one came to our booth, it didn't work out. Come back, strategize. What else can we do? Talk to the organizers and say, what else can we do, right? What else can we do? Because once you start to do that and understand what the community needs, then your organization can deliver that to them, and you'll see a big change on your end. So that would be.
Yeah, fantastic. All right. Well, again, thank you, West Hartford Chamber of Commerce, Minority Business Network. Shout out to the leaders of Minority Business Network, Chris Clark and Stephen A. King. I'm a member of MBN, so it's been such an honor to represent the team today, and this conversation. We wish you all well. Stay cool, stay hydrated. It's hot out there. And make sure that you get tapped into what is happening in the West Hartford region. The Chamber of Commerce has a slew of events that are always happening. So check out the website, register for events, walk around, support the community, support the businesses, and let's expand and build community greater. Thank you so much for joining us. We look forward to seeing you on the next Colorful Conversation.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Say good.